Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. So today, Rachel and I will be talking about leading on reading for pleasure in primary and secondary school contexts, and we'll be talking about sort of the research and practical implications of this as well, and giving you links to lots of resources too. So I thought it might be useful to start, first of all, with the National Literacy Trust's most recent annual survey of children and young people's reading. So this was published earlier this year, and they looked at the reading enjoyment of children and young people. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner, it's a really large sample of UK children who participated, looking at levels of reading enjoyment. So this is back in 2019, so before the school closures. And what you can see here is a pattern which has been evident in the last few years in which they've been carrying out the survey of a sort of decline in the number of children and young people who say they enjoy reading. So it's higher among primary school children, but then it declines into adolescence and sometimes with a slight increase at the end. But you can see something around 72% of children aged 9 to 11 say they enjoy reading. And then when they start secondary school, only about 50% say that they enjoy reading. Let's look now at the number of children and young people who say they read daily outside of class. So this is the same sample of children, it's just their response to a different question. And you can see that the percentage who read daily outside of class actually drops considerably. So we had anything from 72% before down to about 41%, and around 50% here down to about 23%. And so what I've done here is basically plot the difference between the number of children and young people who say they enjoy reading and the number who say that they read daily. And just as an example, if we take this orange bar, for children aged 8 to 11, there's 30% who say that they enjoy reading, but they don't read daily. And we know that the benefits of reading don't come from saying that you enjoy it. The benefits of reading come from actually reading. And so what I'm interested in my research looking at motivation and engagement in reading is understand children's motivators to read so that we can identify more effective ways to encourage children and young people to choose to read outside of school. So what I'm going to do first of all is just define the terms that I'm using before going on to talk about some of the research. So as I said, my work around reading motivation is about understanding the gap, understanding the drivers as to why a child would choose to read or not. And reading motivation has been defined as the drive to read resulting from an individual's beliefs about, attitudes towards, and goals for reading. So it's quite complex. So an individual's beliefs about is the extent to which they believe reading is a useful and important activity. Children and young people who think it is useful and important are more likely to read. But it's also an individual's beliefs about their own reading skills and their perceptions of themselves as readers. And those children and young people we know who've got more positive perceptions about themselves as readers are more likely to choose to read. Reading motivation also reflects attitudes towards reading, so levels of enjoyment of reading, and also goals for reading as well. So why are they choosing to read? So a reading goal might be a child chooses to read because they love the feeling of being immersed in a story, or they choose to read because they want to learn more about a topic that interests them. Or they want to read in order to achieve a good grade in reading, for example. So these are the types of goals for reading that I'm talking about. Reading engagement, on the other hand, reflects behavioural, social and cognitive engagement. And reading motivation precedes engagement. So if children are motivated to read, then they will choose to read. Behavioural reading engagement is basically children's reading behaviours. So how often do they read and for how long? What types of text do they read as well? So books, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, digital text, comics or magazines, these are children's reading behaviours. Social engagement basically reflects social activities around reading, so discussions with their friends about books or book clubs. And cognitive engagement reflects the child's level of cognitive engagement while they're reading. And we know ourselves sometimes when we read, we just skim read something and we don't pay much attention to it whatsoever. And sometimes children can do this when they're reading as well. They're reading with a very shallow level of engagement. But what we want children and young people to be doing in order to derive the benefits of reading is to be reading with a very deep level of engagement. So a child who's kind of deeply engaged with what they're reading will maybe come to a word that they don't know and might spend more time trying to decode it. Or they might not understand the meaning of the word, and so they may use the context in order to work out what that word means. or they may come to part of the book that doesn't make sense based on something they've read previously, and so they'll look back in order to try and resolve their comprehension. So children who are reading with high levels of cognitive engagement put more strategies into their reading to support their language and literacy skills. And so we're always trying to encourage children to read with kind of depth of engagement. And as you'll see later, this is important for emotional well-being too. So why is reading for pleasure important now? Well, I think the book reading experiences have the potential to support and develop children and adolescents' language and literacy skills and their well-being, but they'll only do so if we connect children and young people with the right books. And by this, I mean the books that are going to support and consolidate and develop children's language and literacy skills, and that are really going to resonate with them as well in order to support their emotional well-being. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of understanding what experience or what children want to get out of books, or teenagers want to get out of books, and then connecting them with the right types of books that give them those experiences that not only develop language and literacy, but also support well-being. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just share a research study which we carried out a couple of years ago. This was actually carried out in collaboration with the Scottish Book Trust, and it was published earlier this year. And there's a link to this open access paper as well, so you're welcome to read it if you'd like to. And in the paper, we talk about what motivates children to read different text types, so not just books, but other text types as well. But for the purposes of today, I'm just going to talk about books. And we found that children within the same class actually had lots of different reasons as to why they might read. Some read to be entertained, for some it was a way to relax after a long day in school, they said. Some liked thrilling books, they liked to be excited. Some read for escapism, some read to learn more about a particular topic. Others liked the familiarity of fictional friends or an author or a book series, and they read for that. So children and young people have lots of different goals or reasons as to what they might want to read. And in a previous study that we published in 2015, we found that children's reading motivation drives their reading choices. So there's a real connection between what children are looking for in a book and the types of books that they're choosing to read. As part of the same project, which was called Growing Up a Reader, we also carried out research with adolescents, and we were interested in why they chose to read books. And again, there's access to the article, just using that link there. And what I've done here is I've plotted all these kind of intrinsic or internal reasons as to why they said they wanted to read books, and then the extrinsic or external reasons. And I'll come on to discuss that later. But you can see again some similarities, but also differences in why adolescents said they chose to read books. What I also found particularly interesting was why teenagers said that they didn't read books. So for some of them, they just said it wasn't encouraged. They said that when they were in primary school, reading for pleasure was something that was promoted. They were expected to read books outside of class. But in secondary school, they just weren't encouraged to do it. And so why would they do it? Some said that it wasn't cool, that they just lost the habit. They don't know at what point they stopped reading, but it's just something that they stopped doing. Some teenagers made the point that reading a book when you're a teenager is actually very time consuming and very effortful as well, because they said that books for children tend to be shorter texts that can be read more easily, whereas when you're a teenager, books tend to be a much bigger commitment, they spoke about. And so it really put them off because it seemed like too big a commitment. They suggested that there were other activities that they'd rather do, and some spoke about difficulty in finding a book as well. And they said that when they're on the phone, things just pop up that interest them. Some of them follow they're on certain blogs, but everything on their phone is kind of personalized towards their interests, whereas they just haven't had the experiences of choosing books for themselves. And it's quite difficult and inconvenient to find a book. And so by understanding the challenges that teenagers see around books, we're hoping that we'll be able to kind of identify more ways to encourage book reading around teenagers. And as a result of this project, we have another one starting with the Scottish Book Trust later this year, which is called Tackling the Drop-Off, Understanding the Teenage Reading Experience. And this will be a study which will run over the next 3.5 years. So what are the advantages of book reading? So I'll talk first of all about the cognitive advantages, and because of time, I'm just going to focus simply on the language and literacy benefits of reading books over other text types. So there's a large volume of research which has showed that children and young people who read books as opposed to other text types develop better word reading skills, better comprehension, fluency skills, and spelling skills as well. And book reading also supports and develops children's language skills. And this is because the qualities or characteristics of book language are actually very different to the qualities or characteristics of spoken language. So if you think about spoken language, it's often characterized by unfinished sentences or interjections like like these kind of things as well. Spoken language rarely reflects a kind of coherent, well-articulated train of thought. It's characterized by dialogue with someone else as well. So, and in the spoken language as well, we actually use quite a restricted vocabulary unless we're explicitly trying to teach vocabulary as well. So the qualities of language that children are being exposed to through spoken language has actually got a lot of restrictions. Whereas with book language, this book language typically exposes children and young people to a much wider and much more varied vocabulary than they get within spoken language. They get better sentence structures, they get more clearly articulated trains of thoughts, but also the expression of ideas that the author is trying to convey as well. And this is why book reading benefits children's literacy skills, but also their language skills as well. And there are also social and emotional benefits of book reading too, although the research base behind this is much weaker than the one looking at the cognitive benefits. It's simply the case that the volume of research just isn't there. And there's been a lot of research which has been carried out among adults and less among children. However, there is research showing that children who read books often report increases in empathy. There's been research to demonstrate improved social abilities, reduced stereotyping. And in 2018, the National Literacy Trust carried out a project looking at the relationship between literacy engagement and well-being. And there's a link to that report there. And they found that there's a link, albeit a weak one, between mental well-being and reading and writing enjoyment and attitudes. And I would guess that there is probably a link between reading and mental well-being, positive mental well-being for some children. But for other children who are non-readers or struggling readers, if they're being encouraged to read for pleasure, this might be something which is actually incredibly stressful for them. And so it won't be associated with positive well-being. And it may also be the case that there is the potential for there to be a relationship between book reading and well-being, but we're just not connecting children with the right types of books that really support their well-being. So again, I'm going to share a study by the National Literacy Trust because they tend to carry out these large-scale studies. So back in 2008, Christina Clark and colleagues looked at the differences between children aged 9 and 14 who identified as readers and non-readers. And when they were all asked how reading made them feel, readers were more likely to associate positive feelings with reading, such as being calm, happy, curious, or clever, while non-readers were more likely to report negative feelings. So they were more likely to say that reading makes them feel bored or makes them feel stressed. And so it's really important, if you're promoting for reading for pleasure across the whole class or across the whole school, that you make sure that you're not unintentionally excluding those children that you may actually be wishing to target. And it's important that you recognise that reading is not necessarily something which is pleasurable for all children, particularly those children who struggle with reading. And so some extra work needs to be done there. So how do we go about promoting reading for pleasure or motivation and engagement to read? Well, reading skills are crucial. There was a meta-analytic review which was published earlier this year. What this is basically a synthesis of all the research studies which have been carried out to date, looking at the relationship between children's motivation to read and their reading skills. And this is for children from, it's called kindergarten to grade 12, but it studies across the world. The meta-analytic review resulted in 132 research papers being identified, with 185 independent samples within them, and a large number of effect sizes, because of course you have multiple analyses within each paper. And what they found is that there's evidence to support a bi-directional relationship between motivation and reading. So this kind of reciprocal relationship whereby children who have better reading skills are more motivated to read. As a result of greater reading motivation, develop better reading skills, possibly because they read more or they're more cognitively engaged with what they're reading. So you get this kind of cycle going. But what they found from the longitudinal studies is evidence that earlier reading skill is a stronger predictor of later motivation than motivation is of reading skill. And this has consequences for teachers working in primary school contexts, particularly in the early years of primary school, because it suggests that it's really important to focus on research-informed reading instruction to ensure that children become successful and independent readers as early as possible, while at the same time promoting a love and interest in books, words and stories, but that you focus on reading skills as a way of developing children's positive perceptions of themselves as readers that makes them more motivated to read, and then you kind of start this positive cycle. This is also replicated in 2 studies which were carried out in 2019, but rather than look at the relationship between reading skill and reading motivation, these studies looked at the relationship between reading skill and the amount that they said that they read for pleasure. So Mina Torp's study was a longitudinal study where they tracked children for about 9 years from the age of 7. This was the point of school entry because the study was carried out in Finland, right the way through to 16. And they looked at children's reading skill and their leisure reading activities at multiple time points. And they looked at a range of reading activities. And then Elsa van Bergen's study, this was a different type of research design, twin data, and they applied a behavioral genetic approach to look at the direction of causality. So in the first study, they found again in the first few years of school, so from the age of 7 to 9, because they started school at 7, it was early reading skill that influenced leisure reading activities. So reading skill influences the amount children choose to read. And then as they got later into primary school, this relationship started to become reciprocal. And they found that of all the text types measured, it was book reading that was particularly important for developing reading skill. And then again, in a very different type of research design with a different group of children, they found again that this causal relationship runs from reading ability to print exposure. That's how much they choose to read. And so they concluded that children's reading skill determines how much they choose to read rather than vice versa. So why would this be the case? Well, it makes sense, I think. Good reading skill makes reading a relatively easy and effortless process. When children develop reading skills quickly and become successful and independent readers early on, they have much more positive perceptions of themselves as readers, and this is very motivating as well, knowing that they can do this. And it also means that children and young people are able to access books which are written for their age group. Very often, if you're a struggling reader, it's very difficult to find texts that have the topic or the interest level that you're interested in that align with your reading or language skills. So reading skill is necessary, but it's not sufficient because we know that many good readers do not choose to read regularly. And so we also need to understand about the principles of classroom instruction to promote reading for pleasure. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm very quickly going to run through what the research says around principles to promote motivation and engagement to read. So I often do professional learning sessions and I usually go into these in a lot more depth, but I'm just going to run through them really quickly now. So the first is about promoting intrinsic rather than extrinsic reading motivation. So intrinsic reflects a kind of internal desire to want to read. So choosing to read because you're curious to learn about a topic or because you want to spend time with fictional friends. Whereas extrinsic reading motivation is reading to achieve a separable outcome. So for example, to get recognition from your parents or teacher, or to get a reward or a good reading grade, okay? And we know that intrinsic reading motivation is more closely associated with positive reading behaviours and choosing to read independently outside of class. It leads to greater cognitive engagement as well, and it's associated with better reading skills in the long term too. And so we should always be thinking of ways to promote and understand intrinsic, this internal desire to want to read. Access is really important as well, and I appreciate that that's very difficult at the moment, but ensuring children have access to text types that resonate with their interests while at the same time being at the right sort of reading level, and giving children choice over their reading activities as well. Relevance is important, so that there's a kind of a relationship between a child's goal for reading, so they're reading to learn or they're reading to relax, and that the book that they have is relevant to the goal that they're trying to achieve and the experience that they're looking for from the book. Success is crucial as well, so it's important that children have successful reading experiences, that reading isn't seen to be something which is really challenging. And of course, we want to be exposing children to new vocabulary and to new words through reading, but it's got to be at the appropriate level of challenge so that children are also experiencing reading success. Collaboration with other children and with others, discussion around books types are important. And then interest and enjoyment are important too. So recognizing that some children like to read to pursue their interests, whereas other children just want to kind of read for enjoyment and don't necessarily want to kind of deconstruct what they've read afterwards or report back on it. They just want to read for pleasure. And although this comes from a kind of different body of research, there's quite a lot of work looking at the importance of teachers having a good knowledge and understanding of children's literature. So Teresa Kremen and colleagues at the Open University have done a lot of work around teachers who read and readers who teach. And this is kind of around promoting teachers' awareness of how incredible children's literature is. And I'll be giving a link at the end to the Teachers Reading Challenge if you haven't heard about that yet. But it's about getting teachers reading children's literature more so that they're able to kind of help children make the connection between what they want out of a book and what books they're aware of. Okay, so before I pass over to Rachel, I'm just going to go through some recommended reading and resources. The first thing that I'd like to point out is Education Endowment Foundation evidence review looking at children and young people's literacy development. In addition to looking at reading for pleasure, I have two other sort of main research interests. So one's looking at early reading acquisition and development and the most effective ways to support children's early reading skills. And the other is looking at children's reading comprehension with different text types. And I find it incredibly useful to understand how reading for pleasure fits within understanding literacy development more broadly. So if you're interested in reading a bit more about this, then I'd highly recommend this report. There's also a couple of great articles. One's come out in Test about reading for pleasure, does it boost reading ability? And then a really nice one in Frontiers for Young Minds on the science of reading comprehension. And this is the link to the Teachers Reading Challenge, which is a collaboration between the Reading Agency and the Open University. But it's about encouraging teachers to read children's books and to share their knowledge of children's literature. I'd also like to share details of a Lauco network. So this is a network that I co-founded in 2019 with my colleague Lynn Duncan, who's at the University of Dundee. And as a researcher, I'm really interested in trying to connect research and practice. And so the Lauco network has been done specifically to do this, to group together individuals who have shared interests in supporting the language and literacy skills of children and young people, but who are perhaps working in different sectors, whether it's speech and language therapy, teachers, researchers, policymakers, etc. But what you might be interested in is we had a seminar series a couple of years ago, and we've put all of our recordings up on the webpage, and we've got a whole session dedicated to reading for pleasure. I also have my website where I put lots of different resources as well. There's 5-minute kind of snapshots of me sharing different research topics. I interviewed teachers about how they promoted reading for pleasure in their school. I produced posters, which are kind of short summaries of research that I carried out. So there's lots of resources there. And the Growing Up a Reader website. So this was the project that was just finished this year. I perhaps didn't give you details of the project. So we actually trained a group of primary school students, a group of secondary school students to join our research team. So they came to the University of Edinburgh for research training, and they actually interviewed their peers about why they read and what they do and don't like about reading and how reading makes them feel. So it's their research that we've been using in our articles. And it was a real collaborative effort with them. And this was a project which was also carried out with the Scottish Book Trust. Which leads in so nicely to Rachel now talking about the work that they're doing.
Thank you, Sarah, that's great. So yeah, as Sarah mentioned, this links really nicely in with the work of Scottish Book Trust. So reading for pleasure and positive reading experiences, which Sarah's touched on already, we know that those demonstrate a key impact on attainment. And I'm sure a lot of you here today will know that too. And in addition to creating opportunities to encourage reading at school, it's important to connect children and young people with the right books and for them to identify themselves as readers, which we know from the research is so important. And we know that not all children have access to books or the appropriate support to open these opportunities to them. And this will have grown, sadly, during lockdown and during school closures. However, creating and sustaining a reading culture in your school can play a key part in addressing this. And our Scottish Book Trust programmes will support you to do this. That's what they're designed for. And they refer back to the principles to promote reading motivation and engagement that Sarah mentioned earlier. So I'm sure some of you will be aware of Scottish Book Trust and you have been involved in some of our programmes before, taking part in them. If you're familiar with any of our programmes or like anything that we do in particular, please let us know in the chat. That's always good to know. But for anyone that doesn't know of us, we are an independent national charity that aims to change lives through reading and writing. Our schools programme is designed for 5 to 18-year-olds, so all school-age children, and gives children and young people great opportunities for exploring reading and writing. It's entirely free. And it also supports learning professionals with tools to create positive reading experiences through events and resources which are ready for you to use and tailor to your settings. So our programme can also fit in with your local recovery planning that you've been doing and link in with priorities around health and wellbeing, as well as has a demonstrable impact on attainment. As Sarah mentioned, we know that reading can be a really great strategy for supporting wellbeing, alleviating stress and anxiety in young people, and promotes emotional resilience, which will be vital at the moment. But in addition to that, it's fun and enjoyable, and it gives pupils positive learning experiences of which the benefits will carry with them throughout their lives. So if you're thinking about starting to lead on reading for pleasure in your setting, or you've been doing that for a wee while and you're thinking about what you'd like to do next, we would recommend creating a structure of reading for pleasure. And it can be helpful to start thinking about creating a structure to encourage reading as well in your setting. And this will help give you a foundation to work from and then refer to in line with your school's priorities too. So the First Minister's Reading Challenge can give schools a perfect structure to promote reading for pleasure. It's a national programme that is open to primary and secondary schools, public libraries and community groups. The programme includes all the resources and inspiration staff need to get started in embedding reading for pleasure, whether that's in their classroom or across the whole school. And it links in with the existing school improvement and recovering planning that you'll have in place already, so good to go and easily integrated into existing improvement plans. And it can also be easily integrated with your existing school priorities too. For instance, if you're prioritising health and wellbeing, which we know so many people are in the coming term, and rightfully so, the Higgius 4 Planning and Evaluation Toolkit available on the FMRC website, which is just, there's this wee screenshot on the slide there in front of you, it can allow staff to really focus on reading related activities for the whole school that would support transition, emotional wellbeing, resilience, all of these things that we know are core to the health and wellbeing offer. The toolkit is also accompanied by case studies and best practice examples for each quality indicator, giving staff inspiration for getting started or tailoring ideas to their setting. So it's a really great way to embed that structure of reading for pleasure in your setting. And all of the examples that are in the toolkit are flexible and accessible, which means it allows schools to frame their work on reading in a way that will be most effective to them. The Reading Challenge also allows you to link in with the work you're already doing as a school to promote reading. If you've already kind of got started on your reading journey and you've been prioritising reading for a wee while, then it can be a new priority in line with your school's updated plans, or it can be at the top of your agenda. It's really flexible depending on where you are. And if you're beginning to build a reading culture in your school, there are resources and support to get started, including digital reading passports for pupils, group passports to display in your classes, and printable cross-curricular book lists, which we know are really popular. And likewise, if you've been sustaining a reading culture for some time, there are really creative activity ideas that are tried and tested by teachers that we know people really enjoy, that can be implemented to maintain engagement with reading and introduce new positive reading experiences to pupils. So registering your school for the challenge also gives you access to funding opportunities too. We know this is something that schools are always looking for, and rightfully so if they want to prioritise reading. So holding events remotely or in person with creative practitioners such as authors and illustrators is a proven way of building engagement around reading, especially with more reluctant readers, like Sarah was mentioning. We want to make sure that reading is accessible for all children and young people, even the ones that are maybe a little bit more reluctant or a little bit more not so keen on reading. So these kind of experiences, having author events and things, are a really great way of engaging with children who maybe aren't traditional readers in the sense of the word. And the funding allows schools to design an event linked in with an existing project or to meet new needs. For instance, if you were doing a project on developing young workforce, or you've decided to kind of explore emotions more this year, it enables you to do that, but also purchase book stock and develop resources to sustain reading motivation too. There's also a variety of best practice examples that have been tried and tested by learning professionals that are all open-ended and allow staff to use these ideas in their own settings too. So once a structure has been introduced in your setting, using the Reading Challenge, for instance, as a foundation for that, it's important to ensure staff have opportunities to develop their understanding of reading for pleasure. And this will enable them to be confident when talking about reading and introduce reading-related activities that are effective and engaging for pupils. So Scottish Book Trust offers a range of free online CLPL webinars to support staff with their professional learning on topics related to reading and writing. And they include lots of practical ideas for embedding reading for pleasure and support on making the most of our national programmes, such as Read, Write, Count and the Reading Challenge as well. And we've seen the changes in practice as a direct result of attending our sessions too, which is always great to see. But it means that we can also showcase this work as part of our content to ensure it reflects the true practice that we're seeing in Scotland on reading. So these webinars also include a series of book discovery sessions for learning professionals to develop their understanding and knowledge of children's books. This is something that we've been developing quite recently, so it's still quite new for us, but we've been getting quite a lot of positive feedback about it. And we know that staff don't have a lot of time, to develop that understanding of children's books, or don't really know where to start. So there's such a variety of them. So we've been running these sessions to really support staff with that. And as Sarah mentioned, it's so important to tap into that knowledge of children's literature. So these sessions showcase book recommendations from ourselves at Scottish Book Trust, but they also give learning professionals the opportunity to share titles that they've used as the basis for class novels and topics. So again, tried and tested by learning professionals. And in attending these sessions, staff are better able to recommend titles for their pupils based on their experiences and interests. Again, that makes them more relatable so that they're able to understand their experiences better. And it gives them the opportunity to discover books which can form meaningful and rich class text too, so they're much more engaging for the pupils. And introducing pupils to new titles helps to build their identities as readers and find texts that are relatable to their current experiences, which we know from Sarah's research is essential to cultivating that love of reading. And in addition to the sessions and the webinars that we run, we offer a bank of learning resources and book lists which are available for free to download from our website. These are all tailored to particular age groups and curriculum for excellence levels, so you can filter them based on themes that link in with a current aspect of the curriculum that you're looking at the moment. And there are more in-depth, detailed resources on building reading culture, but also quick activity ideas as well related to reading based on if you only do one thing to cater to learning professionals' needs again. So if you're just in need of like a quick activity idea, then there's ones there too, as well as the more kind of in-depth, detailed resources that you might be interested in. And they're also linked with our programmes, so that means they can act as like a launch pad to further activities to continue building and sustaining reading for pleasure amongst your pupils. So they're not just like a one-off. They always can kind of link into other programmes too. For example, if you work with secondary schools or you work in a secondary school, a great tool to point English department staff or school librarians towards is our app for teens, which is called Bookzilla. You may have come across it before, and it can be used to encourage reading motivation in S1 to 3 pupils, which we know we're a noticeable tail off in reading for pleasure when teens are maybe don't have that same reading motivation as they maybe did when they're younger, even if they were very keen readers. And so the app encourages teens to track their reading, share ratings with their peers, find new titles, and encourages them to take on reading challenges too. It links really well in with Sarah's research because it encourages teens to see themselves as readers, discover new genres, explore the types of books that they have read or maybe haven't read before, and helps to really develop a unique identity and motivations for their reading too, whether that's for escapism, relaxation, enjoyment, learning, any of those principles that Sarah mentioned earlier. It really helps to cultivate that identity for your pupils as readers. When introducing this pool, staff can also have rich conversations with the pupils about their reading habits, which is really, really great. And this can be used to inform activities and future reading activities too. So when staff are knowledgeable about children's and young adult books and can recognise the importance of promoting reading for pleasure as part of their practice, they can then take the opportunity to create positive reading experiences for all pupils. We're just talking about there how important the reading motivation and reading enjoyment is in order to really see that impact. So creating positive reading experiences is a perfect way of doing that. And these are one of the most effective ways of cultivating a love of reading across your school and proven to have a positive impact on overall attainment. So our programme includes a range of reading related events and are accessible to all children and young people. And these can be a really great outlet for all pupils, as we kind of mentioned earlier, including keen and reluctant readers alike, ensuring that those children who struggle with reading are able to reap the benefits too. So we've already kind of touched on author events when we're talking about the Reading Challenge funding, but author events really can be a key method for building positive reading experiences. Our Authors Live programme brings the most popular children's authors into your school for free with a digital author event, and you can watch each session live or on demand as well, whatever suits you. These are broadcast by the BBC, and there are events for all age groups, teen, young, lower primary, upper primary, whatever you need. And these are all accompanied by learning resources for follow-on activities too. And as you can see on the slide there, from last year's evaluation, we noticed that the vast majority of viewers carried out additional activities related to the programme after watching the broadcast. So it just shows the additional learning potential that there is from each event, no matter what they are. And the Scottish Friendly Children's Book Tour has also moved online during lockdown, and it provides schools with a variety of online events with a range of children's and young adult authors. These are all interactive digital events which you can connect with from your school and give pupils the opportunity to ask authors questions. And these are all accompanied by resources to promote further reading as well. And it also kind of encourages questioning and writing skills too, and there's so much learning opportunity from a single event. So both of these programmes I wanted to highlight to you because they're really good approaches to put focus on reading for pleasure in a quite simple way. I mean, if you wanted to just do an author's live broadcast, it's really simple, but a really effective way of connecting with your class and connecting with reading. And something actually as well that's really worth pointing out is Authors Live is actually accessible for families from home as well at the moment, because it was being shown on BBC Scotland during lockdown, which is fantastic. So families can access it on iPlayer too. And also gives schools that opportunity to connect with other schools around Scotland, watching the event live and introducing pupils to new authors and books too, which we know is so important. You can also connect with reading as a class with our book prizes. For primary schools, every primary one will receive a BookBug Primary 1 family bag with the 3 shortlisted books for the BookBug Picture Book Prize. These are 3 high quality titles from contemporary Scottish writers, so they're an excellent selection. And the winner is voted for entirely by the pupils, giving you that chance to really champion the pupil voice and engage lower primary classes with activities critically responding to the book. And similarly, the Scottish Teenage Book Prize encourages teens across Scotland to read, discuss and vote for their favourite of the 3 shortlisted titles. These are a range of books showcasing the best of Scottish teenage fiction and what they have to offer. And the prizes really give schools the opportunity to introduce shared reading projects, book clubs, and cross-curricular activities, which there are all learning resources available to support your staff with on our website, but these all in turn help to cultivate those positive reading experiences for pupils. And all of our programmes have a demonstrable positive impact on attainment and improvement, but it's really important to highlight how they can promote equity in your setting as well, I think. So in addition to every primary 1 pupil receiving a bag, which we just mentioned there, every primary 2 and primary 3 pupil receives a bag of books, writing materials and number games specially selected and designed for them as part of the Read, Write, Count campaign. So the Universal Gifting Programme supports equity of access to books and learning opportunities for primary 1 to 3 pupils and their families, and it really aims to improve parental engagement. Along with managing the distribution of the bags to schools and holding webinars to support learning professionals with the campaign, we also provide a package of resources for learning professionals to use to introduce the bags to pupils and parents, build on practical cross-curricular activities with the items, and encourage home learning. The teacher guides, which are available on our website, also include a variety of activities for each item linked to Curriculum for Excellence. There's a wee example on the slide there from last year, one of the books, and these can form the basis of introducing the bags in class beforehand, and they can also inform home learning grids for families if you're sending them home too. And in addition to this, recognising the need for home learning support, which we really recognised during lockdown this year, the Scottish Book Trust have developed a home activities hub, which includes resources and ideas for families to use together at home. And we know that learning professionals can use this to promote equity and engage with parents on their child's learning, and in turn address attainment, which we know the role of home learning plays a big part in. If families take an interest in their child's reading and recognise the importance of reading and reading motivation, then we know that this can have a really positive impact. So the impact on the attainment gap as a result of lockdown, I'm sure we're all aware and has been recognised in recent weeks. However, last year's evaluation of Read, Write, Count has highlighted the usefulness of the bag items at home, which is really refreshing and really positive. And the majority of responses to our parent survey used the bags to support literacy and numeracy skills at home during lockdown, but also found themselves enjoying using the bags together and having fun as a family, reading the books and playing the games, which is just a really lovely thing to think. So providing universal access to books and accompanying activities to create these positive reading experiences in school, but also at home, can really help to ignite that love of reading for pupils, but also helps parents recognise the importance of reading at home too. And thank you for listening today.